Today I'll give you a flow line of the chapter, a consolidated approach, wherein you can cover the content properly and also answer every question. So down the line, 5 days, you just divide the chapter for 5 days and do as many questions as possible, both in manual. First read, for instance, if you have textbook NCERT syllabus, maybe we should divide the syllabus into the abiotic factors and responses, adaptations, then population, organism interactions. Maybe if you divide it into 3 parts, then first part you read the textbook through and through. Total number of pages in the textbook distributed for these many days. Okay, you please see that and read that much. Start doing MCQs right from stage 1 questions. See how many questions are there. Divide the total number of questions for those many days. Hypothetically, if there are 200 questions and you have 5 days. So keep 40 questions daily as a target. In what approach I am going to teach now? Do the same thing. It will cover all the syllabus and it will also make you good with the chapter. Maybe here we should do. Just follow the revision line. It will be fine. 4 people waiting. Okay. So we will start with hierarchy of the organisms. Hierarchy. So we start with organism. So the next level of understanding organisms in a group is organisms, same species of course, in a definite geographical area. Definite geographical area. What is this level? This is called as population. Correct? Grouping of individuals of same species in a given area is population. In that context, Bangalore is one population, Mysore is one population. Same species inhabiting a definite geographical area. Then if there is a communication between the groups, that is community. Now Bangalore and Mysore is a community because they commute each other, they communicate each other. Then communicating, interacting. Okay. So if the community, so right from community, I have people waiting. This is very disturbing. I don't know why don't you join by time. Organism, same species inhabiting a definite geographical area is population. Two populations communicating is community. So when do I call a community ecosystem? When is it a community is an ecosystem? So I have population A I have population A, population B, population C. So A can communicate to B, B can communicate to C, C can communicate to B, C can communicate to A. In all these contexts, it's populations communicating each other is community. That's what I just told. When will a community become an ecosystem? When it has exchange of energy, exchange of energy, okay, whatever we are doing now, we will have that on Thursday test. No, whatever is the left syllabus, you will have that only. Exchange of energy and recycling of nutrients. If a community has got recycling of nutrients and exchange of energy, then that becomes ecosystem. For us, ecosystem is point of interest. And the next hierarchy. Now, if I see, India is also an ecosystem. Its organism, populations, community, established community, communication is ecosystem. Now, if I say what is the northern limit of India, you say me. I'm exhausted of people entering the waiting room. Please stick to the time. Every time I need to go to waiting room and permit you to the class. 2-3 minutes is fine. People will enter now also. See, not allowing is a clear decision. But I get pop-up is one point, and second point, if I allow them, they will be there for the rest of the session. That is the only point which keeps me to go back and take them into the class. Please stick to the time. Don't come whenever you want to the class. Few people have network issues, but that won't be dysregular. Every moment I attempt to write, I get a pop-up. 2 people are waiting, 1. Now also I get. I will not admit them. So if I take India as an ecosystem, the India has natural borders. North, I have Himalayas. South, let us take English Channel. I have Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea. I have all these as natural boundaries. Ecosystem within a natural boundary is landscape. Ecosystem within a natural boundary is landscape. Got it? Now, landscape sharing a climate. The word climate is very important. Climate are constant environmental conditions across a geographical area. If I say Arctic and Antarctic poles, we immediately get into our mind that they are completely filled with ice. Isn't it? So that type of climate, what is there at the poles is constant. See, weather is changing. Summers are hot is climate. We experience more temperature happening in summer season is climate. Which day, what temperature is weather. Temporary changes is weather. Constant environmental condition is climate. That's why we have a weather report. We don't have a climate report. Got it? So climate, landscape with a climate is biome. Biome. Got it? So we have different biomes. Textbook also gives a good picture of biomes, but I will say you all the biomes, easy way to remember. Okay, you think if this is the earth, what I am drawing is the equator. Now right from the pole, Arctic, Antarctic. Now just below the pole, what do we have? Whatever I am drawing in blue here, the zone of blue, this is just below the pole. What do we call this as? Tundra. So here also it is tundra, just below the pole. Now the next biome latitude wise is just below the tundra. I have whatever I am drawing in green here is called as taiga. Taiga is nothing but coniferous forest. Coniferous forests. We don't have taiga in the South Pole. And below the taiga, what I am drawing is temperate temperate then we have subtropical, whatever is dotted blue is subtropical. Then on either side of the equator it is tropical. All these are biome. Tropical biome, but tropical will have tropical grasslands, tropical deserts, tropical grasslands, tropical deserts, tropical rainforests. All of them are within a biome, small biomes. Tropical deciduous forests. Again, all of them comes under tropical biome only. I will send a tabular form to read about each biome. Please read that. That should be fine. These are the biomes. I'll share a tabular form. Just read that. After the biome, what do we have? We have biosphere. All biomes. When I complete the life on Earth. So after the biome, it is biosphere. Got it? So this is what we need to learn about hierarchy. Organisms, populations, community, ecosystem, landscape, biome, biosphere. Because we have questions based on hierarchy, I did that. Then little question oriented points. The term ecology was first used by Reiter. Then we have Ernst Haeckel was the first to define ecology. You have a textbook definition, reciprocal relation between animals and the environment. Define ecology. Reiter coined the term. Professor R. Mishra, father of ecology in India. These are father of ecology in India. So these are questions. The people who are behind the terms. Got it? Take a screenshot. Then I will also give you a tabular form for the mean annual temperature, mean annual rainfall, and vegetation in biomes. So to learn biomes, I will share you in the group today. I will share 2 tabular forms. Please share with the friends, as all of you will not be in one group. Then comes the next part of the lesson. So we are done with hierarchy. We are going to learn at organism level first. So we are going to learn ecology at organism level. When it comes to organism in a habitat, so how organism interacts with habitat, how habitat interacts with organism is ecosystem or ecology, correct? Now, what are the factors of the habitat which influence the survival of organism? So we usually say first abiotic. We'll come to biotic later. Abiotic factors. Abiotic factors are 3 types. Climatic, with reference to the climate. Then we have edaphic. Then we have topographic. Correct? So abiotic factors are again classified into climatic, edaphic, topographic. Climatic here is what all we study in the textbook. Temperature, water, light, wind. We don't study wind in the textbook, but wind is a climatic. Whatever is forms the climate in that habitat. Edaphic is all the factors related with soil. Study of soil is called as edaphology. Edaphos means soil. Formation of soil or study of formation of soil, pedology, but these words are used in synonyms with each other. I will read everything about soil. That study is either called as edaphology or called as pedology. So soil is also abiotic. Textbook gives soil. Topography is related to altitude or slope, concern with surface of earth. Got it? So everything is abiotic. Now we will study them in the same way. So you don't have much about soil in the textbook. So I want you to cover everything about soil from your manual under this flow. So then we have certain definitions before we go to abiotic factors. You know what is a habitat? The place where an organism lives is its habitat. The morphology of an organism is called as habit. Correct? So we have two important words called as ecological niche one word. What is ecological niche? This is put forth by Grinnell. This can be a question. Grinnell. What is ecological niche? This explains about range of conditions that organism can tolerate resource utilization, how the organism uses resources, and what is the functional role of organism. This is niche means a space, functional role in a habitat. So let me give you an example. If I am living in Bangalore, Bangalore is a habitat, then I know how I should work, what amount of money I should be earning to have a comfortable life in Bangalore. So I know as per what I can withstand, as per what I am earning, I will use the resources. Somebody who is very rich may offer a meal every day in a 13th floor, a restaurant like 13th floor, or I may be happy with Brahmins or Vidyarthi Bhavan. So that is what is my tolerance. I am okay with getting fed in Vidyarthi Bhavan and still surviving. I can tolerate. But somebody may not. Correct? Tolerance, resource utilization, and functional role. So maybe in the area I live, for all the conditions I'm explaining, I am the only one. No two species will be in the same niche. No two species will be in the same niche. Because every species has got its own tolerance, its own resource utilization, and its own functional role in an ecosystem. But somebody like me can be in Europe. So totally we can see a similar type of niche of the same species in another ecosystem, in another biome. So if two species have a similar role in different geographical regions, then we call them as ecological equivalents. ecological equivalence. These words are questions. What is ecological niche? No two species will occupy the same niche in a given ecosystem, but we may have a similar species occupying the same niche in different geographical regions. We call it as ecological equivalence. So now we will start with abiotic factors one on one. Want to take a screenshot? Take a screenshot quickly. Now the first abiotic factor, even your textbook says, is temperature. Correct? All of us know how temperature influences the survival of an organism. How? How? Because enzymes work at optimum temperature. And enzymes are responsible for metabolism. So if the temperature changes, enzymes don't function and metabolism will halt, organism will start dying. So temperature influences the cellular functioning directly because enzymes are proteins and any change in temperature will change the function of enzymes. Then we have to see different types of organisms based on their temperature tolerance. I am covering your competitive part here. Please listen to me carefully. Temperature tolerance, that is, at equator, let it be animals, let it be plants. They carry maximum tolerance to high temperature, isn't it? Yes. So they are tropical zone. What do we call such organisms which can function at high temperature? Megatherms. Megatherms, which can tolerate high temperature at metabolically normal. Then if I come subtropical zone, so organisms which are tolerant to the temperature in subtropical zone are called as mesotherms. Mesotherms. Then we have organisms which tolerate temperatures in temperate biome or temperate regions. We call them as microtherms. We are going from the equator towards the pole. And those who live in tundra and pole are very cold biomes. Poles are permanently frozen. Very cold biomes. Those organisms are called as hekistotherms. Hekisto means very cold or very low temperature. Hekistotherms. This is with reference to the temperature tolerance of an organism in its biome. Similarly, we have ectotherms, which are otherwise called as poikilothermic. Or cold-blooded animals. Everything is same. So they can't maintain a constant internal temperature. Their temperature keeps on changing with the ambient temperature. Those are called as ectotherms. Similarly, we have endotherms. Endo means inside. whatever is the change outside, there will be constant internal temperature. Their homeostasis is very good because enzymes are not influenced by temperature. Now endotherms are again two. Endotherms are stenothermal, which can tolerate narrow range of temperature. Maybe if I consider 0 to 20 degree Celsius is tolerance, below 0 above 20 will start damaging. Stenothermal, which perform constantly within a narrow range of temperature. They are warm blooded only. Endotherms are called as warm blooded otherwise, because their temperature is always same. Which can tolerate narrow range is stenothermal. Which can tolerate wide range is eurythermal. So eurythermal are usually birds and mammals. Birds and mammals. Stenothermal are polar bears. So any change little also will start affecting them. Polar bears, lizards, all these organisms are stenothermal. This is what you need to learn. Everything about temperature. Then water, I request you or I suggest you, please read the textbook. Whatever is the salinity given for inland water, sea, hypersaline lagoons, like greater than 5 parts per million, 30 to 35, greater than 100. The values are important for question. Then we have uri-haline. Then we have uri-haline and stenohaline. Uri-haline means that aquatic organisms which can perform constantly even when there is maximum change in the salinity concentration. Even when the concentration of salt changes, they perform the same. Example, salmon, fish. Okay, whereas shark is stenohaline, which cannot withstand too much changes in the saline concentration. Tentatively, it has a narrow range of toleration. Apart from this, we don't have anything to read in the water. Light. So light again. So when it comes to light, we need to discuss the story in plants. We need to discuss the story in animals. Correct? Because why is it so important in plants? Because of light only they are performing photosynthesis. Correct? And because of which they are producers. Apart from photosynthesis, the plants also depend on light for flowering, Okay, and reproductive activities. Okay, then animals depend on light for forage activities. I'm sorry, there is something wrong. For forage activities, forage means eating patterns. Dogs, sorry, all the birds will wake up at the dawn, start flying to get the food, and come back to the nest at the dusk. For them, it is not 8 to 6. For them, it is light which educates them about the day. So, for forage activities, for reproduction, because most of the animals are seasonal breeders, and for them, a season is how they understand in times of light occurring in a season in the day. So, reproductive and migratory activities. So it is only the change in the light and the duration of a day which will educate an organism for its migration. Okay. When we are discussing light, let us discuss something with reference to the light happening in water bodies. This is your competitive content. Water bodies. So for me, a water body can be a freshwater body, can be a marine water body, but still the light will incident on the surface of water body. Correct? Yes. So we have to learn what are the layers of light incident on the water. So the area between water and the land, that is the bank of water body, the place where land ends and water starts, that is called as littoral. Then we have limnetic. Limnetic means the entire water body exposed to sunlight. When I see Pempanad Lake in Kerala, Alippi, I see there is a huge stretch of water. That entire surface of the water is limnetic zone. Limnetic zone. Then till certain layers, the light can penetrate. That is called as euphotic zone. This receives the maximum light penetration into the water body. Then I have dysphotic zone. Slowly the light coming into the water will start reducing. Dysphotic zone. Or this is also called as aphotic zone, beyond which the light cannot penetrate into the water body. Then we have profundus. So littoral, bank, limnetic, exposed surface of the water body, euphotic, the zone where the water body receives the maximum penetration of sunlight, and dysphotic where it does not receive. Below dysphotic, we have profundus. We call this as profundus because it occupies maximum area of water body, profundus. Then we have benthic. Bottom zone, let it be a freshwater lake or let it be a sea water or a sea. Benthic is bottom zone, which is perpetually dark. It is perpetually dark. So with reference to the light incident on a water body, we see the following zones in the water body. Along with this, you please learn turnover of lakes. We have good picture. Turnover of lakes. So the upper layer of the lake is called as epilimnion. And mesolimnion, the middle part, and hypolimnion. So when there is the water gets warmed up, it moves to the, it becomes light and it starts moving to the upper part of the lake. Whatever, when it is winter, the upper layers of water will get cold. Then it becomes denser than the deeper layers. Slowly the rotation of turnover of lakes occur. The upper waters will go deep because they became cold, and whatever is the warm water in the lower zone will come up. The opposite happens when there is the other seasonal turnover. So lake turnover also please study when you study about all these zones in the water body with reference to the light incident on it. Okay, then comes soil. Take a screenshot. We are done with temperature. I am done with water. I am done with light. We have come to soil, edaphagic factors influencing the life in an ecosystem. Take a screenshot. Now soil. Correct? So what is soil? Soil is nothing but Earth's uppermost crust. Earth's uppermost crust is soil. Actually, on the basis of formation, we have two types of soil. Two types of soil. One is in situ soil formation. That means the soil started forming at one part. It forms the soil at the same part. For instance, you take, this is the parent rock. This is parent rock. Okay. So this parent rock will start with a, 1 minute. Okay. So the parent rock will start, sorry, what did I do? Will start withering. Layer by layer, the soil will form. So the rock is also there. The withered soil is also forming layers about it. That is called as in situ. Whereas the second category is transformed soil or transported soil. So there will be soil erosion from one place and it gets deposited on other place. So that is transported soil. The soil can be transported by gravity. because of the gravity from an elevation to a slope. If the soil forms, it is called as colluvial. If it is because of the running water, soil erosion by running water, I call it as alluvial. If it is by wind, I call it as aeolian. And if it is by glacier, then it is glacial soil. So depends on who brought the soil. We have types of soils. Now we need to understand soil in soil profile. Soil profile. What is soil profile? The smallest three-dimensional volume of soil which helps us to understand the profile of soil. We call it as pedon. So a small piece of soil which will give me a view in 3 dimensions to understand the stratification is pedon. So I am drawing a pedon here. If this is a pedon, correct? Now we'll go color wise. We'll go color wise. The upper layer of the soil horizontally. So we call it as horizontal, right? I have topsoil, subsoil, C zone and R. So I am writing the most superficial is O zone or zero zone. Topsoil is A, correct? B is subsoil. That means recently formed layers. C is large rocks, which has to be still weathered a lot. And then last one is R. This is parent rock. This is parent rock. So O is, this is zero layer. It has organic debris, uncomposed or partially composed. A is topsoil. B is subsoil. C is large rocks. R is parent rock, which is yet to wither. So this is a soil profile. And it can be physical weathering, chemical weathering, biological weathering. Biological weathering is by lichens and mosses. But they form soil. Weathering forms soil. So when you read this, you need to remember humification also. This is in ecosystem, but still it makes sense here. Humification is once the soil is formed, addition of addition of organic matter to weathered rock is humification. Got it? All these is about soil. Apart from textbook, you please read all this content from this one, your manual. Then we have humus addition is important because 1 minute, somebody is at the door. 1 minute. 1 minute you give me, I'm coming back. Yeah. Somebody in the waiting room, let me admit. Addition of organic matter to weathered rock is, the humification is important because it helps in cycling of nutrients and prevents the soil from compaction, and also improves the aeration and water holding capacity of the soil. So the humification brings the soil to function. So humification is important. Then what is alluviation? These terms are interesting to know. All this is your manual content. Alluviation. Alluviation means if these are upper layers, and let me draw the lower layers in blue color. Alluviation means if washing down of material from upper to lower strata. This is alluviation. Illuviation means enriching of lower layers because of the incoming material. So donating end is alluviation, receiving end is illuviation. Alluviation means flow out, illuviation means flow in. This is how actually the soil becomes functional after humification. I will also share a tabular form about the composition of the soil and which soil what type, or it is given in your manual. Read what is the composure of sandy soil, clay soil, loam soil. That should be fine with soil. We don't have much questions beyond that. And then based on the nature and productivity, you want to take a screenshot of this, take a screenshot. So nature and productivity. We have red soils, the acidic laterite soils, black soils, cotton soils, riggers, and terrai or barber soils. Just go through the types of soils. You will just come to know what they are rich with, what they are not rich with, just to know everything about soil. So once you finish textbook, finish everything with reference to soil in your manual also. That should be fine. Don't read anything much beyond what I told. These are abiotic factors, correct? Now, response to the abiotic factors. This is properly given in textbook. We don't need to read anything beyond textbook. The regulators, the conformers, the migrators, the suspenders. Point to point read textbook. That's enough when it comes to response to abiotic factors. We don't need anything much. We have little to speak about adaptations. So that completes 1/3 of the lesson. What is organisms and populations? The hierarchy. Then understanding the ecology at organism level. Then what are the abiotic factors? And how does an organism respond to abiotic factors? That is one set. While an organism or a population is responding to an abiotic factor stress, that organisms will survive, which will adopt. Correct? So the next topic is adaptations. Your textbook gives the definition of adaptation. This is important. Adaptations. And after that, we start speaking examples in about adaptations. For instance, first when we speak about dry conditions, dry habitats, dry habitats. Dry habitats are two things: high temperature, no water. Both cause dryness. If temperature is more than precipitation is also dry. If precipitation is less than the temperature is also dry. So we get the examples of the adaptations of plants in dry conditions, like storing the water or sunken stomata, waxy cuticle. All these are adaptations shown by plants in dry conditions. Similarly, textbook mentions about kangaroo rat. Then textbook speaks about adaptations at high altitude. That means they give us one stress and they say how organism adopts. We are all speaking about organism survival in an ecosystem. High altitude increase in number of RBC is the adaptation. The textbook poses you questions. The next paragraphs are questions. Okay. So what are the questions? Point 1. Textbook asks you, how can thermoacidophiles survive high temperature and perform their metabolism? Bacteria. They have thermostable enzymes. Their enzymes can work at high temperature. That's why they survive is the solution. Answer. Then textbook says you, how can you see fish below the frozen layers of water? They have antifreeze proteins is the answer. So textbook says certain questions and we have to read them. And animals in the colder climates, we have actually two rules when it comes to animals adapting to dry conditions are done, no? Then cold climates. So we usually see two rules here. One is Budgman's rule. Another one is Allen's rule. Another one is Allen's rule. Budgman's rule is the surface area to volume ratio. Colder the climate, bigger the surface area. Okay, so we see that the polar bear is much bigger in its size than the tropical bear. This is called as Budgman's rule. But in Allen's rule, the animals in colder climates will have shorter ears and limbs. This is to minimize the heat loss. Even when I was teaching, we had a contradiction about that. One rule says organism will have a bigger size in colder climates, And Allen's rules say that they have smaller parts. This is possible. Body can be big. The extremities and the ears from where the heat is lost, they can be small. Yes, this is possible. Budgman's rule and Allen's rule are adaptations of animals for colder climates. Similarly, we have Wrench's rule. Wrench rule, R-E-N-S-H. Wrench rule. What does Wrench rule is also about colder climate. Birds will have narrow wings in colder climate than birds in warmer climate. So when the air is cold, it is more dense. The resistance offered is more. So what happens? It has more narrow wings to overcome the resistance. Narrower the wings, better the flight. And we have another rule called as Jordan's rule. Jordan's rule. Jordan's rule is also about the lower temperature, but in the water. So the fishes are larger in size and they have more number of vertebrae. So cold water is more difficult to swim. So they have more vertebrae to overcome the lower temperature of water. This is Jordan's rule. All the rules are questions. Budgman's rule, Wrench rule, Jordan's rule, Allen's rule. They are questions. Okay. And I told you like how you should read the textbook under adaptations. And we also have adaptations to pressure. Your manual clearly says how a whale is adopted for pressure changes, how it obliterates the air cavities, how it closes the ear cavity, how it collapses the lungs, how it withstands the pressure changes by maintaining itself. Read that when it is pressure adaptations. We have adaptations for temperature, we have adaptations for loss of water, we have adaptations for high or dry climate. Similarly, we have adaptations for pressure changes. We need to read all of them. So we have behavioral adaptation like basking in the sun. That is also adaptation, but behavioral adaptation. So your manual shows how plants adopt for cold water in water, how plants adopt in dry conditions. All this, isn't it? So read that. Those all are questions. And when you read morphology, we see a lot of adaptations of root, stem, leaf. We can count all of them here. Anatomical adaptations and morphological adaptations. Then when it comes to xerophytes, that means the plants which survive in dry conditions. Dry conditions is high temperature and no water. In both ways, it is dry condition. So how will a plant adopt? All of us know that we have a group of plants called as ephemerales. Ephemerales. These are the plants which will grow. For instance, when it is summer, they will start germinating the seed in summer, and then they germinate, they come to reproductivity in summer, they fertilize, they produce the seeds and die in summer. They will not make themselves available for drought conditions. Whichever is the favorable season, they will finish the life cycle within that. I will not see the plant beyond that. We usually call such plants as drought evaders, or drought escapers. Then whereas we have succulents in the dry condition only, plants which store water, they can survive because they have water in them. So they are drought resistant. If for somehow they happen to lose the water they store, they will not survive. They try to resist the drought by storing water. Drought resistant. Then we have non-succulents. Neither they store water nor they are ephemerals. They survive with what all water is available. They are called as drought endurers. See, I eat some amount of food to work properly. I eat food and I store food. When I don't get it, I eat that. So I am resistant. Correct? Or I work in the season only when food is available. I am an ephemeral. I work with eating 1/4 of the food what I get. I am an endurer. For me, the condition is not affecting. I'm still a performer. Got that? So that is all about the xerophytes and the points about them which can be questions. Then we have population. You last 15 minutes. Let me see. Everybody are following? I'm seeing yes or no. Population, the next topic. Please read exactly what is there in the textbook. Populations, and the next part is interactions. So these textbook is fine. Okay, but with population, we have certain terminologies which you need to know. The first one is ecophene. What is an ecophene? Ecophene is phenotype variables due to fluctuation in environment. So this range of variability shown by phenotypes is called phenotypic plasticity. So this is a species which is undergoing evolution in a habitat. So if a habitat gives me, for instance, we have seen in the xerophytic plants only, when there is no water, few have evolved to be ephemerals, avoid the drought. Few have evolved to show resistance. Few have evolved to be performers even when there is a challenge. So one organism is showing a kind of adaptation or a variability in a phenotype. That is called as ecophene. We call this as phenotypic plasticity because nothing is reversible. Once it adopts, it adopts. It will never go back to the state before adaptation. Plasticity means which would never go back to the original variation, correct? Once it is genetically adopted, I call it as ecotype. Ecotype is genetically adopted. That means this is the dead end of ecophene. Ecophene is undergoing the evolution. Once it is adopted, it will become ecotype. Okay? Then we have keystone species. When we read population, we read one example. Even though the species is in very less number, they influence the fate of the ecosystem. Such a species is called as keystone species. We read an example when we are reading population that I have one banyan tree with a huge canopy, and below that I have 100 Parthenium grass plants. Who is more in number? The grass plants are more in number, correct? But who decides the fate of the grass plants? Banyan tree. But there is only one banyan tree. This is keystone species. So when there are many species in an ecological setup, even though small in number, if that influences the fate of the ecosystem at different trophic levels, then I call it as keystone species. Okay. Then we have something called as edge effect. Edge effect. Edge effect means, for instance, all of us know what we mean by an estuary. Correct? Where we have the salt water and the fresh water filled up. So it is the place where the sea is coming in contact with the fresh water. They mix up. So usually I see lot of diversity at such transition zones, ecolines. That is called as edge effect. At the edge of an ecosystem, the diversity is more when it is overlapping with the surrounding adjoining ecosystem. Edge effect. So next, you have to read everything what is given about population in the textbook. Textbook is fine. Don't miss a line from textbook. Then comes population interactions. Textbook is again good in this context. You take a screenshot of this. I will say population interactions. Okay, yes. Then population interactions, all of us know. The textbook starts with predation. So predation, we have the two parties are predator is one party, the organism which feeds upon. The other party is prey. The other party is prey. Predator knows it is harming the prey. So it is a plus point for predator and negative for prey. And negative for prey. This is one interaction. And then we have commensalism. In commensalism, one party is benefited. The other party does not know. And we have an example of an egret on a buffalo. A crane-like bird is egret on a buffalo. So it nicely feeds upon with when there is a soil tilling done by grazing of buffaloes. But a buffalo is not aware of this. This is commensalism. Amensalism is opposite of commensalism. In amensalism, one party is harmed. The other party does not know. It's opposite of predator. One party is harmed, the other party does not know. Like we told the example of, for instance, if a goat is actively grazing, then there will be insects dying because of the active grazing. Here, goat is innocent. It does not know it is killing those many insects. This is amensalism. Then we have mutualism. Usually symbiosis comes under this. Both parties are benefited in mutualism. The opposite of mutualism is competition. Both parties know. Competition. Both parties, there is a struggle. One which wins will survive over the other. Competition. Got it? And then we have parasitism. Parasitism. Here the parasite is benefited, the host is harmed. Sometimes they say that parasite is benefited, host is harmed, right? So this is, host also tried to defend itself, parasitism. These are different types of, but in predation we have extra to learn in the competitive part. Time is up. I'll say that difficult point. We have camouflage. Prey does not want to be fed by predator. However, it is the law of nature. Correct. So the predation, what do the prey do? It will defense. So it shows camouflage. It will blend with the surrounding. Stick insect, leaf insect, grasshopper, peppered moth. All these will blend with the surrounding. Predator cannot spot them. This is cryptic appearance called as camouflage. Correct? Then similarly, we also have mimicry. So textbook speaks about two types of mimicries, your manual. One is Batesian mimicry after the Bateson, and the other one is Mullerian mimicry after the Muller. In Bateson mimicry, okay, I will say you one thing. We have three soldiers. Take, for example, I'm giving you an analogy. We have three soldiers. The first one is very good at bow and arrow. Bow and arrow. And the second soldier is very good in using an axe while killing the enemies. The third soldier does not know to use a weapon. He doesn't know to use any weapon. But he will hold a bow and arrow to mimic the first soldier. If he holds an axe to mimic a second soldier, he is trying to show himself a great warrior when he is not. That is called as Batesian mimicry. But now soldier 1 and soldier 2 are experts in fighting. But the person with bow and arrow will think, even if I have an axe, I can also fight. Or a person with an axe will think bow and arrow is also fight. So they mimic each other for a common enemy. That is Mullerian mimicry. So we have wasp and honeybee. Both will bite. Huh? The sting is very bad. Both will bite. But if any other insect would mimic these two, which it can't bite, then that is Batesian mimicry. Both are honest in defense, but resemble each other is Mullerian mimicry. That's one conclusion where the students needs to know. Otherwise, your textbook should be fine with you. So that completes the lesson.